Never gets old. Welcome on a Wednesday night to Generation Movies in December of 2022.
Holy cow!
It's December already. My name is JW Colwell. I am joined, as always, by the effervescent, the ebullient, the ecstatic Rich Drees of FILMBUFF Online. Rich, how's your week going? Do anything?
It's been going.
Yeah, how many hours of sleep you got? Do anything fun this week?
No, not at all. Yes, actually.
See a $300 million movie this week?
Yes, I did.
See a movie that a filmmaker has said has to be in the top 5 films of all time, or it's not going to make any money.
I think he's talking about U.S. box office. It's probably going to have to clear about 700 to 800 million at the U.S. box office, and considering that it's already projected for 150, 175 its opening weekend, might have a good run at it. We're of course talking about Avatar: The Way of Water.
Yeah,
which I did see last night in IMAX 3D. If you can do all of that, see it. Cameron, I can't really give a big review. At this point I'm under embargo on that. I can give social media,
splashes. You can splash stuff.
Which, if you go to my Twitter page at FilmBuffRich, I did give my initial impression last night, which is basically it's giant spectacle, a couple little problems with the script, but see it in IMAX in 3D if you can.
Yeah, the gist of almost all of it is don't bet against Cameron. Wow, is it big? What? Yeah, I know. It's okay. I'm on board. I'm not on board. So I'm on board, but I'm not on board. My big problem is always we're 10 years after the fact, 12 years after the fact, and my main problem is we're not going to have any other movies in the multiplex. Like, my main problem is for theaters right now, because this movie, like, when Star Wars came out and hit, we at least had Jumanji, we had a couple other movies, we had a kids movie, there's not a lot of product there. It's just going to be Avatar, and there's not the screens that are going to be used for Avatar are going to have to be used on like 3 shows a day. We were talking about this last week.
Yeah.
And so
actually, I was looking at the local Cinemark's screening times for the opening weekend next weekend, and they had like 10 and 11 o'clock at night showings. So they were, that was
I guess, but who's going to that? Younger people than us, I guess. I have tickets for an 8 o'clock show. We are. I had tickets for an 8 o'clock show. My wife goes, "What time are we getting home?" And I'm like, midnight, 12:30. I don't, I don't know how many trailers are going to be put on, but we go to an AMC theater, so we get a Nicole Kidman thing. Also, so anyway. I would never bet against Cameron, but I also of all the movies he's ever made, this is like this particular movie is I think I'd rather see Titanic 2. Like the iceberg returns or something. I don't know. You know what I mean? But we'll see what happens. I'll get there, I'll be mesmerized, everything will be fine. I feel Sigourney, I don't know anything about it, but I feel Sigourney Weaver is going to be the thing I come out of this movie talking about.
Yeah.
Probably. I'm right in that age range. But other stories. You just broke something. We were just talking about something. Hollywood Reporter broke a big story that Wonder Woman's dead.
Wonder Woman 3 is the development has stopped. Could be anything. Taking a look, Patty Jenkins was writing a script treatment for a third movie with Jeff Johns, the comic book writer turned producer. And apparently Jeff Johns and Safran have been off coming up with their own plan for what they're going to be doing with DC Films, because they're in charge
like a
now.
Blueprint, a map.
Their roadmap.
A chalkboard, a board where they have everything written down about how are we going to make these less Zack Snydery.
Yeah. Well, I think how do these connect into a larger story that we want to weave?
No, say it. How do we get rid of Zack Snyder and all his fans?
Anywho,
I'll say it, Rich. I'll say it for you, Rich.
Okay. Yeah. And so, anyways, they've recently, kind of come up with their things. Supposedly, they have a meeting with Warner Brothers Discovery CEO David Zaslav next week. But in the meantime, though, they have already met with Patty Jenkins to say the script treatment that you recently turned in does not fit in with these plans, and we're going to stop development right now. And that's all the Hollywood Reporter is reporting from their sources. Nothing has officially been announced. Patty Jenkins hasn't made a comment. Warner Brothers was asked for a comment. They declined.
We live in the age of Zaslav. He's worse than Darkseid.
Well, honestly, I mean, if they still want to go ahead with a third Wonder Woman film, and they just want it to fit in better with what they're planning on, that's fine. Take that moment, say, okay, we're going to take this treatment. Thank you very much. But this is sort of what we need. What can you do with this for us? And then
it's not a bad thing, because the first film was really well received and the second film was not as well received.
No.
So it's not a bad call to maybe pull back and go, Patty, we need to fix this, this, and this. But if it spooks her off, and that in turn makes her star unhappy, Godot has been one of the shining stars of anything DC. So that's where I would worry there. But we have to, at this point, we have to trust in the new DC overlords, James Gunn and Peter Seraphine. I just hope that they have it. Okay, so we also have, let's see, people chatting already. Joe Ridgely says, good evening, gentlemen. Wednesday Night Rock.
Oh, thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe. That's very kind. Ken McKernan, good evening, friends. Good evening, Ken. Glad to see your Facebook exodus is still not happening again. And then Joe writes, my daughter's looking forward to the Big Blue Monkey movie. Laugh out loud. What if that's the trick? At some point, Cameron pulls back and it's actually they're blue sea monkeys from like the back of a comic book. That'd be amazing. That'd be incredible.
All just a big giant aquarium.
Yeah, it's just a big. Yeah, that'd be incredible. And then also one more thing. Like
I said, I can't talk
about
banned
on Twitter though. Everybody's banned on Twitter. If you're not banned on Twitter, you haven't said something good. So
you haven't been banned on Twitter at least once for 24 hours.
For some sort of parody account that you've created in your head. Other things that we need to get to before I get yelled at by Rich. Rich yells at me all the time.
Oh, I do. I mean, SOB.
Just a jerk. If you like the content on the show, the Indie Escape Network YouTube channel, fantastic. We have some very talented folks, CJ and Gabe and Tim Melican and Brandon. And I do want to send a big shout out to Brandon Brooks and all those folks that are dealing with the terrible tragedy in Philly. Losing a good filmmaker. Just got his first movie done, Frank. I got to produce that show with him, and he was a wild cat. We had a lot in common, and it was the first time I ever met him. But I want to, send a shout out to everybody there. Life is weird sometimes and painful and hard, and just want to work it. Also, you can also find stuff with regards to the Indie Escape Network on Facebook. We have a Facebook page. By all means, join it. We are going to have some stuff on the Facebook page, Rich Drees. As you know, as everybody knows, we're ending 2022. Rich and I have come up with a plan for the next set of shows with regards to Generation Movie, and you will be involved. We're gonna involve everybody on the Indie Escape Network page and whatever, everywhere, because we're gonna do something like this. Hold on. Which one do you want? Do you want the red one or you want the gold one? The gold one's nice, but then the red one can get our point across. We'll do the gold one first.
Okay, gold one, then red one. Yeah.
So this is a place where we're headed, Rich and I. I think we talked about doing the first 6 to 8 weeks of 2023. depending on how people feel about it. But so this is the first one, the golden one. That's nice. But this should give you a better idea. This right here. We're gonna do a bunch of the Bond films. We're gonna and basically what we're gonna do is we're gonna put a poll out. It's gonna be on the Indie Escape Network page. We're gonna get your input. We would theoretically like to do a Bond for each of the people that have played Bond. So that would give us 6 individual films, and then 2 more to kind of complement a full 8 episode allotment to Bond that Rich and I want to do at the beginning of 2023. So every one of them, we Connery, Lazenby, Roger Moore, then Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, and finally Daniel Craig. We'd like to do one of each, theoretically, unless somebody says we'd like to do more of one or the other. But with 2 wild cards. So 1 each and then 2 wild cards. So here's the thing. Everybody knows we're going to be doing Her Majesty's Secret Service. That's one of them, no matter what. So because Lazenby only has 1 Bond. We're not going to take into account any wonky Bonds or, for example, these are going to be kind of the regular Bond, like the Bonds. Like it's not going to be like Casino Royale from the 60s. It's not going to be Never Say Never Again, right? We're trying to stay within the Bond proper is the way I would say it. But we're going to do that for the first 8 weeks of 2023, which should be exciting and fun.
Are we?
We can do a poll. I think the way we talked about it was we want to do one for each, and the way it will be a poll, and then we'll have a wild card poll with any of the Bonds that weren't picked. Would be the best way to do that. Don't you agree, Rich?
Yeah, sure. Just
although we don't need a poll for Lazenby though.
No, but when we're doing Sean Connery, just people out there, please do not vote for Diamonds Are Forever. I really don't want to have to sit through that one again.
Well,
I mean, there's a lot to talk about in there.
There's a lot to talk about, but Diamonds Are Forever. If you're telling me our folks are going to pick Diamonds Are Forever instead of any of the other 3 Super Connery Bonds, 4 Super Connery Bonds, right? He's got 4 that are elite Bonds.
Yes.
Right? 4, 1 that's super elite, pretty easy. 1 that's super elite, and then 1 that's really good. Actually 3 that are really, really good, and then 1 that's super elite. Right?
I mean, I would say Diamonds Are Forever is interesting because it's kind of like the fulcrum between the Connery era and the Roger Moore era, and it's very much more a Roger Moore film than it is a Connery film.
Ken McKernan. I haven't seen any Bonds after Roger Moore. Ken, this is a troubling statement. This is a troubling statement.
You might be pleasantly surprised by some of these films then.
I would
if you watch along with us.
There's only one that okay, so for me, we're going to do basically a poll for each of the Bonds. But for me, the only one that's super disappointing is Dalton, right? Dalton is the one that has, and one of his films is okay. Brosnan has an elite early, and then his movies kind of go down. Craig, early good, middle kind of sags, ending really good. Like not sags, but just actually it goes down and then up, and then down and then up. His is like a roller coaster. But yeah, I mean, Ken, not watching any of them. That's and welcome. Let's see. Welcome, Marianne Hagen. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in, Marianne. Can't see in the comments, but if you want to make a comment, by all means do. But yeah, so we're gonna do Bonds for the early part of 2023. Give Rich and I something fun to look forward to, and we're gonna put the polls up in the next couple of weeks on the Indie Escape Facebook page. Basically, what Roger Moore do you want to watch, or what Roger Moore would you like the generation movie treatment to be given to? What Sean Connery? What Dalton? The Lazenby's getting done, and then the Daniel Craig you want to see done, and the Timothy Dalton you want to see done, and Pierce Brosnan you want to see done. So
Yeah.
that
maybe for one of those two wild cards, we can ask everybody what their least favorite Bond film is, and then we can still try to
what if somebody's
find some
least favorite? I don't know. That's good.
goodness.
What if somebody's least favorite Bond is like my guilty pleasure Bond? Because there are a lot of people who are going to say, I feel a lot of people are going to say Moonraker is their least favorite Bond, but Moonraker is one of my favorite Bonds, just because I grew up in a movie theater that played it and I saw it a lot. So
well, that makes for a good discussion, hopefully, and we can.
But it should be fun. We're going to do a Generation Movie takes a deep dive in the Bond thing, and actually, as we get into 2023, there probably will be more talk about who the next Bond is. We're starting to take bets, and we're starting to hear things. So that should be fun. That's what we're doing. I'm excited about that. It should be a fun time. Starting in January, right? Because we're getting away from. We'll be finishing up 1982. 1982 has. We have 3 movies left that we're going to cover in 1982 after tonight. And then we're going to kind of delve into different things. Like the other side thing that we might do after Bond will be, right around February, and March will be a little gold man time, Oscar time. So there'll be something we got going on there as well. And then we'll see what we do for the rest of 2023. It's just, it's a lot of pressure to come up with cool things.
Can I take a nap during some of the rest of 2023? Because I'm exhausted, man. I'm exhausted.
Doing a lot of stuff. But let's talk. Speaking of exhausted and taking naps, and not in a bad way, just in a weird way. Let's talk a little bit about tonight's movie, That Championship Season. It is a 1982 Jason Miller film, written and directed. You know what? I had never realized it was a Cannon film until so Jason Miller brought Cannon money to Scranton, because a lot of this movie is shot in Scranton. Also Robert Mitchum was in. It also means Robert Mitchum was in Scranton, which is just, I can't imagine Robert Mitchum going to a bar in Scranton and being thrilled at all with the things that man has seen. But
I mean, it became a Cannon film because they tried like 3-4 other times to make that film, and everything just kept falling apart on it until Menachem Golan, one of the two founders of Cannon, had seen an Israeli translation of the play in Tel Aviv, loved it, big fan of the play, and finally was like, you know what? We don't have the budget that I think it was Paramount was going to give you, but here's some money. We will give you the creative control to direct Jason Miller, and you can film it in Scranton like you wanted to, which was a sticking point on some of the other adaptations.
Yeah, Jason Miller. The big thing about this particular production, and it's a great place to start, was he was he was an interesting man. He was very Scrantonian in his blood. He had a very driving force to make sure that Scranton got paid back for giving him the blood life, and giving him the lifeblood of his plays, and nurturing him, so to speak, like artistically nurturing him. So there was a very big movement on his part to make sure that Scranton got filming, and that it's a weird draw of this Scranton. As somebody who's from Scranton who lives in Florida now, I'm constantly asked when I'm moving back to Scranton.
It is trying to get rid of you out there.
I don't know. It's not. No, it's not. No, it's people who live in Scranton are like, when are you coming back? Right? Okay. It's like people, when you escape the gravitational pull that is the Scranton Coal Mine Tour, or a Steamtown, or Cinemark, or any of the places that are in Scranton. When you escape that gravitational pull, the pull is still there. People still want to know when you're coming back, and it's like, I don't think I'm ever coming back. It's cold and miserable, dark.
Well,
Every time we drive home, it's so weird, Rich. When you come around the one turn on 81, it's always raining. It's never not raining. And so Jason Miller's
and Miller
tied to this
himself
place.
spent how many years of his life, the last several years of his life, 10, 15 years living in the Scranton area.
Yes,
He
curled up in that one building, in that one apartment building in Scranton that everybody every day would drive past and go, Jason Miller lives there. And then they would drive past Farley's, which was a bar in Scranton. For folks who watch the show who know me, I've drank at this bar. I have bought drinks for the man at this bar. He lived at that bar until that bar was eventually torn down and turned into I think it's a delicatessen now. I don't know what it is. It's like a deli.
The building is still there, but it's like a deli with a Dunkin' Donuts inside it and stuff. It's
so boring. There are not enough bars in Scranton. That's a very in joke. Let's talk about production.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
go ahead.
This started off as a stage play.
Yes.
Did I tell you the story on air or not about when Miller was driving across country?
No, you should tell the story.
Okay.
It was a good place. Good start.
Miller started writing this script while he's a struggling actor, and was driving out to Los Angeles for something, and he had his stuff in his car in the back seat, windows rolled down because he didn't have any air conditioning, and he had the handwritten version on like paper pad like this of that championship season in the back seat. And traveling through Texas, long desert highway, cool wind in his hair, I guess. And a good gust of wind kind of just got in the car, whipped around, and suddenly half the manuscript was littered across the highway in the desert. He had to quickly pull over and run around and get all of the individual pages of that original handwritten version of the play back, so he could continue to work on it while he was out in LA. Then he comes back to New York, and they mount it at the Shakespeare New York Shakespeare was it New York Shakespeare Festival?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah, in 1972. Which is funny because that puts Miller at about 33 years old. So he was probably 31 when he first started writing this. And all these guys are older than he is when he's writing this. But I think he still kind of hits the nail on the head in terms of
aging people coming back to a home. Middle-aged folks. Yeah.
A little bit of midlife crisis, things like that. Questioning things. And we'll get to that later, I'm sure. But
700 performances. So it played from September 1972 to April of 1974.
Yep.
And it's not necessarily a happy play or a musical. So that's a long time for a play to play, which just leads credence to the amount of verisimilitude in it, right? It's very true to life.
Wins a Pulitzer Prize for drama and wins a Tony Award for Best Play in 1973. So
it's the height. It's good stuff. It's an interesting thing too because it eventually goes to regular performances. Over 700 performances on Broadway. So we're not talking about a minor thing. And the idea that he can't get funding for it is wild. Especially when you're dealing with,
first of all,
serious
in
business.
The original play production, Paul Sorvino is in the cast. He's the only one who eventually carries over to the movie. I'm probably conflating a few different attempts, but at one point, William Holden was cast to be the coach.
Yeah, his problem with being cast was that he died.
Yes.
Right? He was definitely cast, and then he passed away from cancer, I believe, like a few months before the shooting began. So they had to find somebody else to play the role of the coach.
Yeah.
One of the major problems that he didn't get their first choice.
Yeah. And then Friedkin was attached to direct it. Friedkin, of course, was Jason Miller's director on The Exorcist. At one point, one of the studios who had the property were like, "Hey, can you change the location from Scranton to Pasadena, California?" Which is a terrible idea. That's an idea that only comes from how can we do this cheaply, and that's never a good.
We own a house in Pasadena, is what you're saying to me there. The studio owned a house in Pasadena.
Way to make your creative decisions.
Well, and that's the production is it's hemmed in a little bit by the fact that he is so steadfast about the idea that he wants Scranton to be paid back in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So he goes to Broadway, he gets success, 844 performances, including the 144 that were at, the Shakespeare Festival, 700 in regular Broadway performances. He comes back. He's trying to get it made. He's trying to get the money, and he wants to shoot on location in an area where, Rich, you and I have both lived. It is not conducive to shooting. It's hard. Like, even when you're doing like independent films or smaller films, it's not conducive to shooting. The weather isn't always great. The the shadows that are cast by the forests are weird. It's not conducive to filming. And then also the areas that he's trying to film in are all basically borderline decrepit. Like the opening shot of this film, or one of the opening shots of the film, is the old North Scranton High School, which at this time was dilapidated at best. So you're talking about, and this was this was a high school that is in the center of town that has been dilapidated since 72, 73, like when they stopped using it. And so it was allowed to just crumble, and they film on location there. So it's like I was watching it and just going, holy shit, I've driven past that. And that looks almost as like the only thing that's different in the shots are that the parking areas are open and they're clean. And I'm thinking to myself, that's a $300 job. Because I can't remember a portion of that time with old North Scranton High School didn't have garbage and trash and like cars that were left and in that front area. Right. So you're talking about, like, not only is he shooting in a weird place that's, 2 hours out of New York, 2 hours here or there. It's really not necessarily conducive. There's no place to edit. There's no
well, you're trucking in all your equipment. There's no equipment rental houses in New York in Wilkes-Barre, Scranton area. So yeah, you're either schlepping in equipment from Philly or most likely New York.
It's 2 hours no matter what. Whatever way you go, it's 2 hours.
And so unfortunately the infrastructure for filming in Scranton just didn't exist then, and kind of doesn't exist now, outside of if you're doing
it still doesn't exist.
Unless you're doing some very small indie stuff.
And then the people, but even the small indie stuff, because you've worked on indie stuff. I've worked on indie stuff in the area. It's usually stuff that's owned by the people that are shooting the indie stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of people I know and I work with both out of Allentown and Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, who do commercial work. They have small studios. They do local commercial work that's just fantastic. And even my friend Jonathan just opened up a photography / production facility this past weekend. And I mean, there's a lot of great stuff. But if you went to him and said, okay, I need, the same type of lighting package that, they use.
Get from a major Hollywood film. Right.
Yeah, major Hollywood film. Unfortunately, he wouldn't be able to do that.
Right. It's sheer will. It's sheer will. And actually, it's kind of the will that Miller shows in saying, I'm going to film here. I'm going to film, some of the things that have to be talked about. Naog Park.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna film in Naog Park. We're gonna like Naog, even in the 70s and 80s, was a trash dump. We had at some point we had a living elephant that is referenced in the script.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We had an elephant that passed away suddenly because for some reason we bought an elephant in the city of Scranton and we didn't have the ways to take care of the elephant in the city of Scranton. So the elephant died fairly quickly. It's referenced in the script. So it like the idea when you're talking to a major production house, his major problems come up in the fact where he's so strident about shooting his film in his hometown. I'm going to shoot it here no matter what.
But the location work absolutely helped set the story.
It's beautiful. Like, yeah, I don't want to take it away. Like, I'm not, when I say that it held him up, I don't necessarily mean he was wrong to not partake in the holdup. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's feasible that not only it makes the movie more authentic by a long shot, but it also it looks better than anything he would have gotten anywhere else. You know what I mean? And there's a decrepitness to it that's strictly Scranton.
And the locals, of course, are very happy to see them come in from the economic standpoint, from the glamour and standpoint. And there was
we're always a sucker for glamour. One of the legacies we're going to talk about later, and this is a big hint. We're going to talk about getting glamored by people for money and profit and film, and this movie is a direct cause of it.
Yes.
So,
but there was a great documentary that came out earlier this year, just over the past summer, by a local filmmaker by the name of Bob Savakinis, called Scranton's Championship Season. And it's about the making of the movie, but it pretty much deals with the local people. They don't. So any of the interviews with like Miller or any of the cast are old file interviews that appeared on like Entertainment Tonight or something like that, talking about the movie. And almost everything else is new stuff with, locals. And they talk about, this and that, and little stories behind the scenes of, Robert Mitchum did this or whatever. It's charming. It's wonderful. It's delightful. It's co-produced by a friend of mine, Luz.
Did you hear? No, again. I'm sorry. Finish. I'm so sorry.
I think it's available online.
We're all about promoting stuff we don't may or may not be able to see.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I hit upon that I discovered was that in Robert Mitchum's obituary, that was written by Roger Ebert. Ebert was on location with them filming that championship season, which is something I never knew.
I did not know that, and that's not in this movie.
Wow. So Roger Ebert's in his obituary of when the day Robert Mitchum died, Ebert talks about watching Mitchum film scenes for that championship season in this small little town in northeastern Pennsylvania. And I was like, so let me understand this. I just want to make sure I get this. Robert Mitchum, one of the coolest actors ever, and Roger Ebert were in Scranton for a brief period of time. That's an amazing story that they were there. But it's
I wish
one
I'd
of those.
Known that. I probably would have sent Roger Ebert an email or something about that if I had known at the time. And this is available at scrantonfilms.com.
Nice.
And we'll try to plug it again at the end. So get a piece of paper ready to write it down.
Yeah, we want to plug anybody that pays attention to Scrantonian stuff. But yeah, so production goes okay. It doesn't go over budget. There's no weird wonky problems with the production. Again, the slight problem with Robert Mitchum replacing William Holden, who passed away. But that's not, and then it was basically one of the cool thing was everybody was paid $250,000. It looks like it was across the board. Everybody got the same amount. And a percentage of the profits. We'll talk about that in a moment. Not a lot of profits. And it did really help Golden Globus and Canon Films kind of. It buoyed its reputation. It gave a Pulitzer Prize winning author and director to a film company that was at this point getting ready to make Missing in Action 2, and Missing in Action 3. So
yeah, it definitely gave them a sheen of respectability.
Right
up until the day it was going to be the day of its grand premiere in New York City, when during the press event during the day before the evening's festivities, Robert Mitchum shows up rip-roaring drunk to the press event.
He was not really.
And so they send him back to his hotel, say, sleep it off. He'll be sober for the actual premiere. He shows up twice as drunk to the premiere, basically.
Well, the old Robert Mitchum story that you can tell on a movie podcast that we have. It's a funny story. It's also in the Mitchum obituary by Roger Ebert. Roger Ebert asked him about his many visits to the Betty Ford clinic. Betty Ford, very famous for alcohol and drug abuse in the 70s. And Mitchum said, yeah, most of the time when I got out of there, I realized what I really learned was that I needed to stop making martinis by pitcher and started making them by the glass. So
that's the old school definition of slowing down.
That's almost being a teetotaler at that point for Robert Mitchum. But the cast comes together. You have very talented folks in this movie. You have Bruce Dern, Stacy Keach, Paul Sorvino. You have Martin Sheen. It is a very talented cast.
Oof.
And Robert Mitchum. And it's kind of a throwback movie, but the funny thing about it, for us, it's a throwback. But in reality, it's one of the first real on-screen views of male toxicity. Like it is very much a toxic, like it is a heavy toxic male film. Like it's one of the reasons why at any given point it's widely considered precursors to Mammoth, precursors to like in a movie like In the Company of Men.
Yeah. I dare say all 5 of the main male characters, in their own each individual unique ways, are assholes.
They're bad people.
And they're working through some of their shit.
Trauma. They're working through trauma. Like the one that comes across the best is James, right? I mean, he's an alcoholic, but he knows he's an alcoholic, and almost every other thing that anybody else says, he kind of laughs it off and just like, I can't believe I'm fucking hearing this shit. Like, I can't believe you're saying that. I can't believe we're talking about this. I've been out in the world, and that's one of the things that I think the movie captures very well, and the story captures very well. When you leave Scranton, there is a certain amount of things you get out of the world. And when you go back to Scranton, the world has never changed. It is the same world. It's like its own encompassing sphere. It just moves through time and doesn't really change. And the politicians change, and the taxes go up, and it never really changes. And I think that's one of the great things about the movie.
And I think it also kind of captures some of the political vibe of the town in terms of,
if you're not a winner, you're out.
There's a lot of old boys networking going on there, which I'm sure is in many towns, small cities of a similar size.
But Scranton is particularly vitriolic about its politics. And I think there's a good point to jump into. Box office is going to be really short, so let's do critical response. One of the things that makes the movie kind of hum, right, is this causing vitriol that's flowing through it. These guys are they get put together every 5 or 10 years for major anniversaries or major reunions, and when they come together, they're as toxic to each other as they are to in their lives, right? So you have one who's a mayor, one who's one who's the assistant to the mayor, the coach, who may be the biggest asshole of any of them as the movie progresses. And then you have varying degrees of shots fired across the bow to mandom, to being a man and being friends with other men, and the idea that the one off limit thing is sleeping with somebody's wife. You know what I mean? Like, and that gets broached. And just
the secrets you keep for each other that are probably the other shitty things that they've done.
Well, the secrets that are kept are shitty, but then usually somebody has a shittier secret that is just bubbling to the surface. And this is all about the bubble. Like this movie takes place in one location. It very much shows its stage roots, right? It very much.
Yeah. Well, when Miller worked on the screenplay, he did, he kind of fleshed some stuff out. We have some scenes outside of the home, outside of the coach's home. We have that one scene that was shot down by Coney Island Hot Dog, where they're looking at the billboard for the mayoral campaign and all that stuff going on outside. You have some stuff outside in the backyard. All of that stuff was shot in Scranton. And there was even more that they shot, Miller had written and shot, but some of that got trimmed out just because of it did, they wanted to like concentrate on what was going on in the house, which was shot on a soundstage elsewhere.
I think all of those kind of they flow together, and the performances are so intense. You're basically dropping a bunch of rats into a cage, and they can't get out, and they just gnaw on each other. And sometimes pick up rifles, little things. Fight over statues and fight over, toy cups that basically they won 15 years ago. And the Mitchum character, one of the things that the sadder things is it's Mitchum at the end of his career, right? He's not necessarily as wonderfully gruff as he was before. So it's right before Mitchum passes, right? And so that's one of the sadder portions. But the other people in the movie all pick up the intensity, especially Bruce Dern. Bruce Dern is really good. Bruce Dern is one of the people when you're looking through for awards for this movie, he won a lot of them. He won, as the frazzled mayoral candidate, that's basically being betrayed by his friend over money, and then also being betrayed by his friend sleeping with his wife. He has definitely got a lot of heavy lifting. Stacy Keach is like the one that's kind of like behind everybody, but never getting a shot. And he has like all the kids and the wife and just, crushed by life. And, has
I would definitely say this is Mitchum's last good role. I mean, he still worked up and through until, into the 90s, for another 10, 12 years. But, the most popular thing I can remember was Scrooged.
Yeah, yes. Oh, no. But he's not doing any heavy lifting. There's a lot of heavy lifting in this movie.
Yeah, I think his performance, I think there is an underlying sweetness because out of all the kids he's coached over the years and decades of his career, the fact that these guys were the winners, those are the ones he feels like are his sons to him. And I'd be willing to bet you, germs to gems, that the only reason he feels that way is because they won.
They won the championship. Yes, because they listened to every single word he said, and they were able to somehow break free of all that. Like they were the only successful.
They scrapped out sometime after districts during regionals. He wouldn't give it. They wouldn't be getting together, and he wouldn't give a shit.
That's another side note with regards to the review of the film. the level of high school sports being important in the city of Scranton and surrounding areas is so high. Like, first off, I'm surprised it's basketball, right? When rewatching the movie, but not surprised it's basketball, but because football is so important in the city of Scranton and surrounding areas, right? On a Friday night, September through December, you're assured to be at a football game. The news coverage on a Friday or Saturday night is all high school, college, high school football. So it is a real interesting look into a small world where these big fish, where some of the fish leave and some of the fish come in. The one character who never comes back to the reunions, and basically it's finally divulged that he doesn't come back because he hates the coach for what he made him do, right? And the response was pretty good. Like, when you look at the responses, it is sitting at a pristine 71% on Rotten Tomatoes. Audience score is well below that at 50%. So I think it's for most people who are Scrantonians or people who live in northeastern Pennsylvania. It's kind of a it's one of those movies that you eventually watch, right?
Yeah.
And the
Everybody
reviews
has
were
like these memories, or these secondhand memories, more likely, of the filming, and they go, "Hey, we had Jason Miller. Jason Miller, we've always kind of clutched to as one of ours." And
right? Even Jason
fine.
Patrick, because he had
Yeah.
lived some time in the area.
And people, reference the movie a lot, but I think, if they see it, they don't recognize it, but
they recognize the places. They recognize the places.
They recognize the places. They're happy with that. There is an underlying tone of racism in all of these characters. That's just, it's like, I mean, okay.
Spot on. It's spot on, Rich. Say it. It's spot on for our area.
I moved into the Northeast PA when I was like 13 years old. So 1983 in there. And at the time, so 3 years after this movie was made. And at the time, it was very waspy, very white. You mostly had like descendants of Irish immigrants who came to work the coal mines and the Polish immigrants who came to work the coal mines.
Irish, Polish, and English.
And and that was it. That was pretty much the background and the makeup, the demographic makeup of all of Wilkes-Barre Scranton. And over years that has changed. And, I think as younger generations have come up, like my generation, people behind us, a lot of that inherent racism is kind of pushed away, but it's still here, unfortunately. So I was kind of like grossed by the casual drops of the N-word. I was like, oh God. Ugh.
Casual drops of the N-word. How about the rampant anti-Semitism in the movie? Like,
and the anti-Semitism, yeah, too.
Yes,
yeah.
The anti-Semitism actually maybe were like the N-bombs getting dropped aren't great. The anti-Semitism that is just simmering throughout the entire movie isn't. It's not comfortable. Like,
the school district I went to in Harrisburg, as elementary school, middle school, so all the way up through 7th grade. It was a suburban area of Harrisburg. It had enough of a diverse population that they gave us as 2 days off in the fall, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, because otherwise all the Jewish kids would have taken off school, and then
it would have been empty. The school would have been empty.
50% of what it normally was.
Yeah.
And I didn't think anything of it. I always say it was a great place to grow up because kids were just kids. You didn't care, what their religion was, what their color was. Everybody was kind of on an even playing field for the most part, at least to my perception growing up and my remembrance of it. Moving up here,
we were.
Eighth grade, I'm in the local high school. I'm not going to say which one. And about midway through October,
somebody's gonna out you.
I don't care. Midway through October, I'm walking between classes, and I turn to like my one friend I was walking with. I go, "Hey, shouldn't we be getting Rosh Hashanah off soon?" And somebody else was walking the other way and goes, "What are you, Drees? Are you a And they called me a Jewish slur, and that's when it was like, oh, ooh,
Oh yeah, no, it's
yeah. That's when it kind of hit me. It was like,
well,
yeah.
and I think that's one of the things that's kind of flowing through the movie. Also, in a legacy way, it's also why this movie kind of the bubbling anti-Semitism, the bubbling open racism. Like when you're talking to people from Scranton, they're like, yeah, that's definitely us. Like there's never a moment where Scrantonians don't go, that's not us. Also, I think that we're one of the areas in Pennsylvania that heavily voted for the former Orange president, and it is one of those weird things where you're just like, oh, it might still be there. Oh, that's darling. When you're watching it now, it's almost like it's weird, and the legacy of it's actually fun because they've done this movie. They did it in '82. They did another reboot in '99. And then they did it again on Broadway in 2011. So it's been done a few times. Let's welcome. Hold on, we got to welcome somebody. Welcome Max Wazza. Thanks for tuning in, or Thiznix for tuning in from Joe Ridging because he dropped the A and didn't. Thiznix, whatever Thiznix is. But yeah,
I mean, not his fault. They stick the A key and the S key next to each other.
They're bastards.
Keyboard.
But I think it makes the movie. It definitely feels like it's a movie that's been established from Broadway, but it also makes the movie feel authentic in that these are male friends that kind of just drop, racial slurs or sexual overtones or any of these things. It does feel like you're getting a glimpse into, as they would call it in 2019 or 2016, locker room talk.
It's a good portrayal of characters like this but I think the camera here, I think Miller's camera is very non-judgmental. And
it is.
Maybe in this day and age we kind of want to be judgmental about that and kind of want the material to condemn that. But I think just how crappy these people are
There's only one character that condemns it, that openly just looks at it and just James, and he's full on drunk from the moment he gets to the house going forward.
That's also because he was outside of the area and comes back and realizes. Yeah. So
that's the magic.
Way, I think maybe the Miller's telling of the story doesn't condemn it, but he allows the story itself to, say what
happened, right? That, and the coach, who is this warm, father figure, by the end of it, he's kind of revealed himself to be, somebody who basically broke these horses and basically rode them to the defining moment of his life, and right up to the next moments of his life where he's getting thrown out of school for doing what he did, treating another, punching a student, treating somebody horribly. So it is definitely very much a film about male toxicity, and also about friends and those you perceive to be friends who aren't necessarily making the choices in your best interest, but most of the choices are usually in their best interest. And we've all had friends like that where you sit down at some point and you're drinking with them or you're having a meal with them and you realize that they don't actually, they're only there for you for what you can give them. And it's a real interesting dynamic. And it's a well done film. Some of the reviews, when you're looking at the 70% on Rotten Tomatoes, so Dennis Schwartz, who's a pretty good reviewer, he gives a good review, but basically says because Miller doesn't have a full control of the faculties. He basically says it very much looks like a play being filmed, right? Which is kind of a technical thing. But I think you're right in the sense that Miller is able to, the camera, sitting on certain characters or as they make decisions or they make revelations is basically like a Broadway camera kind of jumping in. And then, Ebert said that the times he was on set were basically incredible, watching Mitchum kind of like drink something, put the drink down, take a sug of, a cigarette tug, put that down, and then walk into a scene and just turn it on. So it's here's the thing. I don't know that it's a perfect movie, although I do think where you get some interesting perfection is that it opens the door, and where we're talking about different things, it opens the door for me, it opens up a whole legacy thing, right? We're talking about the legacy franchise viability. It's very viable as a franchise because it has been remade 3 times with 3 different sets of actors, and the actors in each of the different productions are all solid choices. So this version has Sheen, Paul Sorvino, Bruce Dern, Stacy Keach, Robert Mitchum. In the 99 version, it's Paul Sorvino as the coach, so he jumps out. It has Vincent D'Onofrio playing the smarmy, rich person. It has,
Tony Shalhoub.
It has, oh God.
Yeah, I'm blanking too here.
Lieutenant Dan. Gary
Sinise.
I was thinking Gary Oldman. I'm like, it's not Gary Oldman, you idiot.
I see that version with Gary Oldman though.
And so what it has done is that it is a defining moment of, and they changed the time period. So like,
yeah,
every time they make it, it's like 20 years later. And I think, I'm not going to lie to you, we're probably due for another round of actors taking a role at the stab at these roles, where certainly we could definitely look into the hints of the, not hints, but the flat out racism, the anti-Semitism, because in the play and the book and the movie and everything, not book, but play and movie, he's facing a Jewish person in his mayoral race.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting thing that Miller has produced a singular vision that actually can be trotted out every 20 years or so, and bring people together. The 2011 stage version, the cast, Peter North was in it. Not Peter North. That would be a totally different movie.
Yeah. Probably playing the coach, right?
No, Noth was playing the smarmy.
Oh, really?
Rich dude. Yeah. Who was the? Hold on. I had it up and then I pulled it down because I didn't know we were going to talk about it, but because that's what it is.
Okay, I got it here. Brian Cox as coach.
Yeah, Brian Cox was the coach. I would have paid money to see that particular revival.
Jim Gaffigan, Jason Patrick, and Kiefer Sutherland.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, actually. That's an incredible cast.
Yeah. And yet it didn't get great reviews.
Yeah, because it might be a dated thing. I think you can see it every 20 years, but I also don't know, like, that first time it was put on film and the first time it was performed on Broadway, right? I think it probably has its people who find it its favorite, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because it is very distinctly about the male condition.
Yeah.
And I think you're always going to get a group of actors in this particular case, like when you look at it, Jason Patric and Kiefer Sutherland, so you had a Lost Boys reunion, right? And then, you know, everybody else that showed up and did whatever they're doing. You know, Gaffigan's interesting. I feel like he would be really interesting in the one role. You know, as like the sidekick. But the legacy of the piece is that it allows for other, you know, mammoth stuff like Glengarry Glen Ross. It also allows for a movie like In the Company of Men, where you're looking at the toxic way men hang out together. How sometimes we're horrible people, right? We don't mean to be, but we just kind of it comes out. And we're kind of shitty to each other. Like we're not. We've all had friends like that. So I
mean, there was another 1982 film called Diner that I think, you know, kind of vibes the same way. So I'm wondering if, you know, that was in part inspired by, you know, the original Broadway show. I mean, it's
Diner's more good natured though.
Yeah, it's a little bit more good natured.
There's a good natured quality to Diner that you know, the people you hang out with, the Diner folks, the Diner kids, you know, are much a happier bunch of
it's much more of a hangout movie than this is.
Yes. But it's in the same ballpark. Let's talk about, so Legacy is pretty astounding, right? It probably has fueled, you know, levels of male toxicity. Like it is definitely a movie where you look at it and you can watch it and then see the other things that grow out of it, right? Let's talk about the bad news. Let's talk about box office for a second. Yeah. It pains me to say this. So it cost a decent chunk of money to make. If you're talking about all 5 leads getting them $250,000 plus gross points, Miller getting $250,000 for writing and directing, so he gets $500,000. You're looking at a budget about $4 or $5 million. Its total gross was $40,000. It only played. Rich, this is depressing. 40,000. That was the opening weekend. It only played on 2 theaters. It only played a week. So when you look at the legs of this, it played 1 week in theaters and then was immediately gone. The adjusted box office is $124,000, which is a good night for Avatar coming up. It's 1 theater. You know what I mean? On next Friday, we'll have 1 theater. We'll have $124,000 somewhere for Avatar. You know what I mean? So it did not kill at the box office. It is that rare thing where you look at it and it is the legacy aspect of it is the complete function of it. It is a testament to a city that this man grew up in. It is a testament to the males he grew up with.
It's a damn shame because, you know, Cannon went into this with the high hopes of, like we said, you know, getting some respectability out of it. Yeah, this was an Oscar hopeful for them. And they would have other Oscar hopefuls. I mean, who knew that Runaway Train would get a Best Original Screenplay nomination a few years later?
Not this, but Runaway Train, yeah.
But not this. And the fact something must have happened somewhere along the line that they lost confidence in it. And I don't know what that was. And I've looked around. Some have suggested, you know, maybe it was, you know, Mitchum's, you know, showing up drunk for the press junket, you know, before the movie opened, being the issue. And I kind of don't think that would be it. I mean, I could see maybe
a series of bad luck.
Maybe some bad luck. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know why Golan Globus wound up just dumping this movie, and I think that's a damn shame.
Now the other significant legacy in this movie is
Mm.
that, and it has to be talked about, but so Scranton, whether it's somewhere, Scranton always seems to be on the peripheral of movies for whatever reason. It was always, my dad always used to talk about it being one of the great roadshow places in the country. Like when theater chains and movies studios would take their movies on the road, there were 3 really good theaters in Scranton. So every once in a while, you have the drizzle down effect that Scranton somehow magically is this magical place. So this part of the legacy of this is that it is a well-known area, and it is a depressed area, and it is the area where they will film a TV show. They will not film it, but they will talk about a TV show called The Office, right? The Office is part of the legacy of this. The idea that this depressed town, for whatever reason, finds, and again, it's a more happy thing. But I would say to you that the Michael Scotts of the world are not very far removed from the characters in that championship season, right? The Michael Scotts who live in Scranton, Pennsylvania, the Dwight Schrutes who live in Scranton, Pennsylvania, um, the
Yeah,
BJ they're not far removed from that championship season characters, right? They're not far removed. Like Michael Scott running for mayor wouldn't be a shocker, in one episode of the. So the legacy is that Scranton becomes this its own character, right? Its own character on screen that it becomes a place where you get stuck if you're trying to get home to your kid and Home Alone, or it becomes a place where a bunch of people get stuck running a paper office, or it's where a bunch of people come home for a game every 20-year reunion, or a 15-year reunion, or a 5-year reunion, and they're trapped in their former lives. So it kind of establishes a legacy of Scranton as a character in narrative forms. Would you agree with that, or is that too far to
Oh
reach?
no! You're absolutely right. I think in terms of how Scranton as a location kind of
It's
functions in a lot
perceived.
of things,
Yes,
this is definitely where that starts. Uh,
it's like the
you know,
foundation. It's the cement on the bottom floor
mhm.
of whatever building they're building for Scranton.
And like up and through the 30s and 40s, the Wilkes-Barre Scranton area was known for coal mining, and it was far more affluent. And once in the
Vaudeville.
50s and 60s and everything, when the coal mining industry kind of just died, um,
Well, in vaudeville, there was a huge
oh yeah,
vaudeville connection
well the
and a
vaudeville
huge
was supported because there were so many
so many
people.
things to do. Yeah,
Yeah, they needed that entertainment, so that's why if it closes in Scranton, Scranton was a big tryout town for
and
Broadway in the 30s and 40s too.
and also, and like I said, a great traveling roadshow. So like my dad before he passed away gave me a bunch of like King and I traveling roadshow cards, and where they
Ooh.
would come and they would basically they would have a whole, like they would have an opening and then an intermission, and so like it became a place where you could take your movies on the road and movies would do very well in this small town, right in the middle of northeastern Pennsylvania. And I think Jason Miller wanting to give back, and Jason Miller building this whole thing with how it's running, and you get a glimpse into the politics of it, you get a glimpse into how the people live, you get a glimpse into even like the police, like how everybody interacts with one another. um it's a defining legacy that actually follows Scranton to its day. Like there's never a better moment than when Scranton is mentioned on screen in a theater. I remember going to Home Alone at the General Cinema, and there's a moment where the mother is stuck and she's like, "Where the hell am I?" And they're like, "You're in Scranton." You know what I mean? Like, damn it, we're all trapped.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an interesting legacy.
It gets name dropped in the Coen brothers version of the Lady Killers as well.
Yes,
One character mentions that he rode a bus from Scranton, Pennsylvania, down south because that's where they transplanted that movie to be part of the Freedom Riders. And and that got a good strong laugh out of everybody. Just hey, they mentioned where I
perfect.
am.
Yeah, that's absolutely perfect for us. And I think that's a wonderful legacy that Miller has given us. And part of the legacy of Miller is that he was this incredible, he was an incredible actor that was in one very large movie, and then kind of a lot of smaller, more personal movies, and then his own personal efforts, and then a lot of missed opportunity, because he was a brilliant Pulitzer Prize winning playwright from the city of Scranton, and he never got rid of the pull. Like, he always came back and was always part of the area, for better or worse for him and his career, to be honest.
True. And Scranton never was able to kind of recapture that Hollywood buzz of getting a production into town to shoot. They've tried. Like in 1985, the Weinstein brothers had their only directorial effort called Playing for Keeps, which mostly shot up in the Poconos, but when they needed to fake a New York alleyway, they came
Tony Harding's
Scranton.
Tony Harding's restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
A Greasy Spoon on Lackawanna Avenue. It was great.
Yep. And that's also like that movie's only remembered for being one of Marissa Tomei's earliest on-screen.
Yeah, it's about a bunch of kids who buy a Catskill hotel.
Yeah, well,
it's
the one
a fun,
kid left it by his aunt or something like that.
It's a fun movie. It's a fun little movie, actually.
I've been up to that location within the last year, this past summer, actually, and it's now an Airbnb. It's a big giant Airbnb. Yeah.
Well,
so if you happen to like that movie, you can rent a room there and kind of walk around the grounds and look, and you can see how it looks now. It looks fairly similar. There's not too much that's changed in the time.
We would also be remiss to not talk about one of the lasting legacies, is that after the brief taste of fame that championship season gave us, and the actor Paul Sorvino came back.
I had one other before I wanted to hit on.
Oh, okay, go ahead. Hit the happy one first.
Okay, yes. Well, in about 2004, 2005, they opened up the Scranton Film Office, which was to help try to encourage productions to come here. It was through, I believe, the Chamber of Commerce. They would box up stuff and send like local radio station bumper stickers and things like that out to Los Angeles for the office.
Yeah.
One of the projects that they were trying to get into the area never happened, and the movie itself never happened, was in 2005, George Romero was going to do an adaptation of the Stephen King novel From a Buick 8. And they were looking at shooting in Scranton. Romero had come into town, toured around, scouted some locations. Not sure why the film never happened. It might have been a case where they couldn't get the budget together or whatever. I know Toby Hooper took it over at one point, but I think by that point when he was on it, the idea of shooting in Scranton had fallen away. But George Romero, one of Pennsylvania's great filmmakers, he put Monroeville on the map for shooting his zombie movies out there. And, it would have been fun to have him, shooting something here. But
the legacy of Scranton is always to be a bridesmaid and never a bride. And
very well put.
Where it very much got taken advantage of, and to a great degree, basically with the light of Hollywood shining in its eye and distracting it from itself. There's a movie called The Trouble with Cali.
Oh, is there?
It's a Paul Sorvino movie. Paul Sorvino, who had been in the original That Championship season, he also was in the second That Championship season, directed the second That Championship season, and so kind of had it as a home away from home kind of place, or at least enough where the locals and the local politicians and people were enamored enough with him to give him a lot of money, Rich, that the city didn't have to film
$500,000.
$500,000 to film a film in Scranton with his daughter, Oscar winner Mira Sorvino. And it's the blackest of black eyes. And it's actually, I actually think it's the last time we actually flirted with, putting any kind of money behind it, taxpayer dollars anyway, behind following, film crew. And it even led to a whole thing with the Jason Miller statue. And there was a Jason Miller statue that was erected in the county square
that Paul Sorvino was making for the city.
Right. And it tied all of it together, and it left such a bad taste in everybody's mouth that this guy
is it's not finished. He just kind of ran out of money during post-production. It's not really color corrected. The sound mix is terrible. The editing could have been better and could have used some work. I've seen it several times now. They've shown it publicly here because the county technically owns a copy of it on Blu-ray, and they've screened it at the Scranton Cultural Center and at the Scranton Public Library a few times. And I've seen it, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 times now at this point, and I find it fascinating. And for lots of reasons I don't want to get into now, but just the amount of location work that they use that doesn't highlight things that feel definitively Scranton-ish, if that's a word. This could have been shot in like any suburban Jersey town,
right? But because he got $500,000 from us, from our grandparents, and
it didn't highlight what makes Scranton visually interesting.
And it came across, and
that's all I really want to say on that.
But I'll say more in the sense that it came across as, it came across to many of the people of Scranton as a grift. It became a bad joke, a punchline to the idea of trying to better ourselves and trying to be a great city that people care about. And it's all because it all has something to do with that championship season, and that Sorvino was tied to it in some way. And that somehow he was tied to the city, and he was tied to Jason Miller. And because he was tied to Jason Miller, they thought that Sorvino cared about the city as much as Jason Miller did. And he just didn't. And
no, it was...
and he cared about the money, and he cared about maybe working with his daughter.
His son Michael is in the movie, and his other daughter Amanda wrote it. This was a family affair in many ways.
But it's a bad taste. That championship season is a good movie. It should be found. It can be watched. It gives you a really great glimpse into Scranton. It really does. It really gives a great glimpse into the city itself.
And again, the documentary is also Scranton's championship season, ScrantonFilms.com.
ScrantonFilms.com. A good source for us. And let's talk about what's happening with us, and then we'll get into where you can find us.
Okay.
So, Scranton is its own place. And I think the interesting thing about where we're headed next week is also its own place. Next week on Generation Movie, The Dark Crystal. Another world, another time in the age of wonder. Jim Henson, Gary Kurst, Frank Oz, the magic of Muppets on a Quest. And it just one of the great scary, wonderful kids films from the 80s that really can make us better people. That will be next week, and then starting this week, I think I'll get them up maybe after the show tonight. We have this thing we're working on. We're working on the phases of Bond, right? We got Connery, Lazenby, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton. Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig. Those guys right there with guns blazing. Everybody's got a gun. And actually, that Craig shot is so dynamic compared to the other guys. Like everybody's kind of just like, well, Connery's kind of cool, and Brosnan looks super cool.
Isn't that Craig shot from his screen test, if memory serves?
It might be, but isn't that the opening scene from Casino Royale?
If it was, it would have been in black and white.
Would have been. Wow. Okay. I don't know. I just work here. I just try to find pictures. Where can people find you if they're looking for stuff, especially that Avatar review that'll be out next week?
All right. All of my writing can be found at filmbuffonline.com. And if I finish it either this evening or tomorrow morning, the next review that I'll have up will be for the Brendan Fraser film The Whale, which opens on Friday. I found it an incredibly moving, touching, sad, beautiful piece. And it's almost entirely predicated on his acting and the acting of the young actress who plays his daughter. That's
a little bit of controversy about that, though. A little bit of controversy.
Yeah, there is. And well, I see some people's point. I'm not sure I definitely agree with what they're saying, and I don't. He's a
good egg. People like him, so there's going to be the fight versus the controversy will be interesting. But
yes, I also co-host a second podcast with my good friend Natasha Bogutsky called The Big Picture Podcast. The last one we dropped was about a week ago. I mentioned it last week. It's where we talk about the movie Wednesday, or I'm sorry, the Netflix series Wednesday.
I just finished it yesterday.
We do a retro review of the original Miracle on 34th Street. So you can find that at bigpicturepod.com or at filmbuffonline.com. And you can find me on Twitter at FilmBuffRich.
Okay, so I'm JW the Movie Guy on Twitter, Facebook. I also do a little podcast called Loud Nerdy. We have a Loud Nerdy the group, and we also have Loud Nerdy the page. Find them both on Facebook. You can find us on YouTube and Twitter as well.
One other thing I kind of wanted to plug. Austin Tronick's The Canon Film Guide was kind of my go-to resource for this week's episode for looking up the
interesting that
he has on that championship season. So outside of knowing about the movie just through osmosis from living here forever, this was the source of the Robert Mitchum got drunk story. So.
Well, and yeah, I mean the Robert Mitchum and Ebert sitting in a fucking Scranton bar.
Yeah.
While Mitchum is getting hammered, and then he goes into the scene after taking a tug on a cigarette. It's just about the coolest Scranton story I can tell.
I've got to. But that's on what? Is that on Chicago?
It's Sun on. Time? If you look up Roger Ebert and that championship season, he talks about the filming. It's right at the beginning, and then he goes into a whole thing about. It's right at his obituary. He goes into a whole thing about Robert Mitchum and his career. It's really a beautiful piece of writing.
I'd love to find the original feature that he wrote as well for that. But
yeah, that'd be incredible because he probably did a big story. But we got big things coming up for Generation Movie. Next week, The Dark Crystal. Thank you for joining us tonight. Stay out of trouble. Yes. Look for those polls on the Indie Escape Network. Have a great evening. Have a great week, folks. 1 week till Avatar. Watch Wednesday. I really enjoyed Wednesday. I didn't think it was Tim Burton at all, which was
Wednesday's so fun.